I've got something really exciting to show you in this 3-part video series, a step-by-step blueprint for mastering the fundamentals of jazz guitar improvisation. I'm basically going to give you a complete overview on how you should approach learning to improvise on guitar the right way and the easy way. I'm going to show you that improvisation doesn't need to be difficult to learn, or confusing, or overwhelming. I'm also going to show you that you might be going about learning to improvise in completely the wrong way. This isn't your fault. This is because of the large amount of inaccurate, incomplete, and disconnected information on improvisation that's out there at the moment. You know, the way many people try to learn improvisation is kind of like trying to learn a new spoken language like French or Spanish by reading a dictionary and a grammar book. And it doesn't work. Of course it wouldn't work. To learn a language, you need to start speaking it, and the same applies to jazz improvisation. But you also need to learn it in a step-by-step process for it all to make sense. And this is the process, the roadmap, which I'm going to walk you through in these videos. So just imagine for a moment what it would be like, to rock up to a jam session or play to your family and friends and feel totally confident with your ability to improvise and have a sense of security on the fretboard to outline those chord changes as you play your solo. To feel completely in the moment and to bust out a creative and original solo that moves people. This isn't just something that some people are good at and some people aren't. This is a skill that can be learnt by any guitarist just like you. And this video series will show you how. I'm Greg O'Rourke, professional guitarist and founder of FretDojo.com, one of the most popular jazz guitar websites online today. I have thousands of subscribers to my website from all across the world, and I'm also a successful author with my book, The Easy Guide to Chord Melody, the one that I collaborated on with my good buddy Matt Warnock, becoming an international bestseller. My website has now helped thousands of guitarists from across the world improve their jazz guitar playing, and I've also been featured on several high-profile websites, including Jazz Guitar Online, Fundamental Changes, and TakeLessons.com. But putting all that aside, what I love doing most is improvising on the guitar and teaching it to you guys. Okay, but before we get into the lesson, let's just step back for a moment. What's so great about being able to improvise? Well, I'm just reflecting back on my own career here. I've had a lot of thrills, playing on stage. I've played to packed rooms of thousands of people. But that's quite a high, but it's nothing compared to the high that I get by rocking up to a jam session and busting out some solos and having a great time with the other musicians there. It's the best thing I've ever experienced in music. I think jazz improvisation is the key skill of any guitarist. It should be the key skill of any guitarist. So let's have a look at this. It was interesting. I did a survey recently to the readers of my website, and this is some of the responses that came back when they were talking about jazz guitar improvisation. So I was reading all sorts of things like, how do I use scales for soloing without it sounding like an exercise? How do I translate what I hear in my head to my fingers and the guitar? A great question. How do I make my lines sound jazzy? And also, how can I avoid theory overload paralysis and just play a great sounding solo? Well, that's what this series is all about. But there's just one more quote that I want to show you. Let's go to the next page now. At the moment, jazz guitar improvisation to me is like when you start a drawing or a painting. I have a big blank canvas and I just don't know where to start. So why do so many guitarists struggle with jazz guitar improvisation? And I have a confession to make. For a long time, I did as well. Let me tell you a little story, and it goes back quite a long time now, when I was still studying at university. Now, I actually wasn't studying jazz guitar as my major. Classical guitar was the main thing I was doing at that time. But, you know, I was very inspired by what my fellow students were doing at the jazz school, and I was really excited by that kind of music, and yeah, it was just a whole new world for me. So I started to enroll in a few jazz units and, you know, did some jazz theory classes and things like that. And I actually was getting straight A's in those classes. You know, I could understand all the modes, all the theory, and understand how to put a composition together and how to modulate keys, all that kind of stuff. But then on the other hand, I was also starting to get jazz guitar lessons alongside my classical lessons. Now, this is the funny thing. I noticed that there was this huge divide between my understanding of the theory of jazz and the practice of actually being able to improvise. I couldn't do it. You know, I was falling flat on my face all the time whenever I tried to do a solo. I wasn't getting any clear ideas on how to get that theory that I was learning into my actual fingers just to play some great music. Now, let's fast forward a bit, because I got so tired of it that I couldn't do it. So I ended up just giving it away for about 10 years. But I came back to it about 5-6 years ago. And, you know, I'd matured a lot as a musician, I think, by then, and, you know, had a different perspective. And I sat down and thought about, you know, why was I struggling so much with improvisation back then when I first tried it? And I realized in that moment that I'd been going about learning to improvise in completely the wrong way. You know, but I'm not going to blame and shame myself too much here, right? Because I think that often the way improvisation is taught is really flawed. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of this. Let's look at a common chord progression, like a 2-5-1 progression in jazz, and let's look at how this would be analysed typically in a jazz theory class. All right, so here's a 2-5-1 in the key of C major. You know, the D minor 7 is the 2 chord, the G7 is the 5 chord, and the C major 7 is the 1 chord. Now, if I was in a theory class, this is how this progression would be typically analysed for ways you could approach soloing over it. So for the 2 chord, you would use the D Dorian mode, which is one of the modes of C major. And then for the 5 chord, you would use the G Mixolydian mode. And then finally, for the C major, you would simply use C Ionian, which is just C, it's another way of saying C major. So you would use 3 different scale choices over these 3 bars. Now, the question I have for you, would anyone actually ever think like that when they play? No. It is incredibly complicated. When you're trying to improvise, you're looking at ways to simplify. And this kind of thinking, 3 scale choices like this over a simple chord progression, is madness. Now, you could say actually, as an aside, that, you know, you could simplify this from looking at this and just saying that, well, all the notes out of these 3 scales are the same, because they're just all modes of C major. It's just that the Dorian scale starts on a D, the Mixolydian scale starts on a G. And so you could just think of it all as being just a C major scale. But I have issues with that approach as well. Now, because if you just think of a scale only when you play, like just doodling up and down a C major scale over this progression, it will sound kind of not quite right. And it's because you're not highlighting the chord tones that are important out of each chord. Now that's the problem with the kind of the general approach of a scale over a progression like that. So both these approaches, the modal approach and just using one scale approach, are both flawed. So I know what you're thinking right now. All right, Greg, I'm convinced the modal scale approach doesn't work. But what's the alternative? Well, let me tell you, I'm going to go through this in detail in these videos. But to kick it off, I want to illustrate what actually happens in the mind when you're learning to improvise, as it's going to help you understand how to go about practicing improvisation step by step. Let's have a look. So remember at the start of the video that I was making the point that improvisation, in the way that you learn it anyway, has a lot of similarities to spoken language, if you're trying to learn Spanish or French, something like that. So let's look at what happens in my brain when I'm trying to learn some new vocabulary on the guitar. Now, I'm not talking about learning scales. If you were talking about scales, the relative thing for that in a language would be like the alphabet. Okay, the alphabet's good to know, but it's not like you speak the alphabet to people. You speak words, right? So what is a jazz word? Well, let's have a look at this. It'd be like a jazz lick, something like this. Okay, so now that didn't sound very scaly, did it? This was actually a piece of a solo that I transcribed by someone. So it's a melodic piece of jazz vocabulary. So when I first learned that, what this does is make a faint neural connection in the brain between all the neurons. Okay, a pattern registers in the mind. Now, if I keep practicing that, it'll strengthen that pattern like this. It becomes deeper. So that's why you have to repeat vocabulary quite a lot in your practice for it to actually stick. Otherwise, it kind of gets washed away. Okay, so I learn one line like that. Now, as I'm transcribing my solo and learning more lines, might learn another line like this, and another line like this. Okay, so can you see what happens as I learn more and more little jazz phrases, vocabulary phrases? They start to cross over and overlap in interesting ways. Like I might learn another line like this. Okay, and the first one that I learnt before was like this. So there's points in these lines that kind of you can cross over from halfway between one line to finish off with another line. So kind of cross-pollinating the line. So let's see, how would that sound like? I could go like this. Cool, so you could hear how I kind of cross-pollinated those two lines then. Now, not only that, but I can kind of mess around with just a single line that I've learned and kind of vary it and morph it a bit. So have a listen to this. I could go, let's see. And there's a new line just by kind of playing around with one line that I had. So you can see on the diagram, when you start building up more and more vocabulary, there's more neural pathways and more connections that combine to give you more possibilities. So if you learn a few stock lines really well, learn them over the chord progressions carefully, then you'll find that it's not restrictive of it's not restrictive of your creativity. You'll actually be able to be more creative because you've got more raw materials to draw from. Alright, so that was a general overview on the types of approaches that I started taking to build my own improvisation skills. And once I started thinking about how the mind works and how it forms neural patterns and the relationship between improvisation to learning a language, I started to be able to build my improvisation skills really quickly, and you can do the same. So in the next video, we're going to get nitty-gritty onto the guitar. It's been a little bit theoretical so far, but there's been so much to cover. That's why there's 3 videos in this series. So the next video, we're going to look at actually a step-by-step process on how to get the vocabulary of jazz securely and in a logical way onto the fretboard so that you'll be able to improvise effortlessly, confidently, and have a lot of fun. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video that you should receive in the next couple of days. So keep your eyes on your emails for when that comes out. But in the meantime, please leave a comment, write one below this video in the box there, and I would love to hear your thoughts and if you've got any questions about what I've covered, and I'll make sure that I answer them for you. Okay, so until next time, that's all from me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.